That's right. It's a special presentation. It's the tool series as we continue on with breaking balls and off-speed pitches. As again, you can find the rest of our playlist on our YouTube channel. If you haven't liked, please like and subscribe our videos. They go a long way. Comments also are always appreciated. And we had a really good year in 2024 in terms of views, and we want to continue that heading into 2025 as the channel continues to evolve. So thank you for subscribing. Thank you for liking our stuff. And I'm going to make a point to sound more redundant and repeat that more and more often because it's important for the algorithm and all that jazz. So that being said, let's go into off-speed pitches, Chris.
Yeah, and depending on your definition, off-speed pitches can encompass breaking balls and changeups, but for our purposes and for StatCast purposes, off-speed, we're just talking about changeups. But the fun thing about changeups is they are it's the pitch with the most aliases, right? Like you've got the Fosh, you've got the Vulcan change, you've got the split change, you've got the splitter, you've got forkball, screwball, the kick change is something new, circle change. It's all these different names, but they all are doing essentially the same thing, right? They're supposed to look like a fastball,
palm ball.
Yeah, palm ball's a big one. Jim Palmer and who else threw a palm ball? A lot of other
people. Former Tiger Joe Bolivar.
I think Trevor Hoffman's changeup was technically a palm ball.
Yeah.
But yeah, they all have different names, and that's kind of fun. But they really are. You're just trying to make it look like a fastball, and then come in, 10 miles an hour slower, or somewhere between 5 and 15 miles an hour slower, depending on what kind of changeup you're throwing. And you can see when they're good, they're absolutely devastating. Tarek Skubal's changeup this year had a 46% whiff rate at the big league level. It's a top 25 pitch overall, one of the top 4 or 5 changeups. Just an outstanding, and his was kind of an unusual changeup because he doesn't have the ability to move his wrist the way some guys do, but it was a seam shifted changeup, and that made it just all the more deadly. So these are, changeups are, generally speaking, they're kind of the third pitch for your average pitcher, right? It's a pitch that you use to get opposite side hitters off your fastball. You got a lefty who's sitting on your fastball, you throw a pitch and it kind of drops down and away from him, and you get strikeouts. But as I said, that's not always the case, and you've got many different shapes and many different velocities and movement profiles and all that stuff. And the Tigers have some pretty good changeups in their system. And we went with our top 5 and the usual, some honorable mentions and some developmental guys. And so number 1 on the changeup list is Lyle Lockhart Jr. And this is a really fun story that hasn't been told much. I guess, he hasn't been to the big leagues yet, so the beat writers haven't really picked up on it yet. And if he gets the big leagues, I'm sure they will. But, Lockhart was a two-way player in college, focused more on pitching toward the end of his career, got drafted in the 9th round as a 5th-year senior by the Dodgers for, I don't know, $7,500, something like that. And they just kind of kicked him to the curb. And the Tigers picked him up in late May, I think, of 2023. And we actually went down and we saw him pitch. We went to spend a weekend in Erie, and we saw him pitch one day, and then we interviewed him the next day, and we talked to him about everything. And at that point, he was still mostly a 3-pitch guy, throwing fastball, curveball, slider. But he had started working on a splitter. And we saw a couple in that game, and they were really it was really, not there. They would just kind of float away from his hand. And he talked about it. He said it's a hit or miss pitch. And fast forward to last year, and it was a dominant pitch for him. It was his best pitch. He threw, I'm looking right now, his splitter had a 54.8% whiff rate on it last year. Hitters hit 155 against it. He threw it 17% of the time. So it's still not his primary pitch, but it became his best secondary offering. His changeup or curveball is pretty good too. But and it's he doesn't throw terribly hard, but the split has the right separation. It's like 78 to 82, depending on the outing. And it became a real dominant weapon for him. And the thing that stands out about it is he just absolutely kills spin on it. It's the average spin on his changeup. Most of the time we talk about spin, you want it higher, right? But really what you want is the extremes. And the spin rate on his split was 824 RPM on average, which would be like the 3rd lowest spin rate in the big leagues for guys who threw a split or change that often. So it's a really standout pitch for him. And if he gets to the big leagues, it's probably going to be on the power of that. So that's why he came in at number 1 for us.
Yeah, as you recall too, he did take a couple outings last year in 2023 to work on the pitching. And the reason why we're showing this here, if you're watching us on YouTube, is the first couple pitches you could tell he's kind of still tinkering with it a little bit as the pitch kind of gets away from against righties. But he is, even his mechanics are a lot more cleaned up than what we saw in Toledo, comparatively speaking to Erie. And that's where he's a guy who really is kind of like one of those. I hate saying this term, or sometimes I don't like saying this term because everybody should be like a quote unquote baseball guy, but he really does work on his craft quite a bit. And he has every offseason has been able to just generate the ability to generate swings and misses. It took him a minute to get adjusted in Toledo, and has been able to become a complete pitcher for the Tigers.
Yeah, and like you said, he's got other pitchers too, but that split really jumped out this year, really developed, and so that's why he topped the list. I toyed with having him number 2 and having Jackson Jobe number 1, but I thought that the Lockhart split was just stood out too much to not have Jobe up there. But it was close. Like Jobe, you could say is 1B. And oddly enough, I mean, we had Jobe as the top of our fastball list. I'm guessing he's near the top of the breaking ball list. And it's just his changeup actually, I think, is his best pitch, even though we had him higher ranked on other lists. Part of that is the movement, the velocity separation, and just how comfortable he is throwing it. He'll throw it to lefties and righties. He'll throw it multiple times in a row, and he's comfortable putting it anywhere in the zone. His first big league strikeout, I believe, was on a changeup that basically dropped in at the top of the zone. Like he threw it above the zone and it faded down into the zone, which was impressive. And I think it's probably going to be his main strikeout pitch in the big leagues, at least to begin his career, because it's the one I think he's most comfortable throwing it and locating it and willing to throw it to everybody. And I think the fastball is going to get him a lot of foul balls, and the sweeper might get him some swings and misses. But I think a lot of guys just lay off that. But I think the changeup is going to be the money pitch for him.
Yeah, especially because that fading action he had in that first major league strikeout too was just the tumbling on that too, and the ability to have the fade, which is key for a good changeup. It really is. You get that fade because it moves a little slower in the zone than per se a 2-seamer or a 4-seamer.
Yeah, and sometimes it depends on how it plays with the rest of your arsenal, right? Like the James Shields had a terrific straight changeup because it looked exactly like his fastball and it just was 10 miles an hour slower. Whereas, Jobe's fastball his 4-seamer has some nice run, and the changeup kind of mimics that, except it sinks rather than rides. And so, yeah, it's a really nice complementary pitch for him. And like I said, I think he's going to throw it more in the big leagues, and it's probably going to be his primary strikeout pitch for a while at least.
Yeah, and that's why he's, again, one of the top pitching prospects of all baseball. Let's move on to number 3.
Number 3 I have is Thomas Bruss, who is not one of the more well-known prospects in the system. He was a independent league signing at the beginning of last year, I think in spring training, actually. I think he was in some of those backfield games, and he's a big guy with a big fastball, but his splitter is his best pitch. And he got I'm trying to look, what's his whiff rate on that? 60% whiff rate in low A on his splitter. Batters hit 184 against it. It sits 88 to 90. So you might be, asking why is he not higher on this list? And it's mostly because he is 25 and dominating hitters in low A with this pitch. And just in general, he didn't throw enough strikes. And so part of that could be that, he's burying the splitter most of the time, and some guys can lay off it. And part of it is just he's not locating the fastball well enough to really play off the splitter. But just based on, velocity, metrics, performance, it was one of the best splitters in the system, if not the best. So I felt like he needed to be in the top 5 somewhere. And then I kind of went back and forth with where he ranked. And I just thought, 60% whiff rate, that probably deserves at least number 3 on the list. But we'll see how it goes in the future. And he's a relief-only guy. And if he can't throw more strikes, then it might not matter. But the raw data right now is worthy of being in the top 5.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's one of those things too where I think with Thomas, it's just a matter of getting more experience, and maybe they're just cleaning up something where maybe perhaps last year, as we've noticed this before with a lot of Tiger pitchers, is that the Tigers having a certain assignment with them, whether work on this pitch or not, or work on something. And maybe with Russ, it's just a matter of just getting a little more experience.
Yeah, I think there's development that needs to be made there, and experience, more strikes. Who knows what? Maybe they need to dial it down a little bit more, but yeah, there's promise there. It just we need to see it in 2025.
All right, let's move on to your next guy.
Number 4, and this is an interesting, is Ty Madden, who we've talked about Ty Madden endlessly about everything, basically. Oh, the fastball shape doesn't play. Which one of his breaking balls is better? Is it the slider? Is it the cutter? Is it the curveball? All this stuff. And he never really had a changeup in college. He threw it like 1% of the time, or like 3% tops. And then last year, they kind of had him develop a split change. It's basically a splitter. And the results were outstanding. I did not really see that coming, but he ran a 45% whiff rate in AAA with a splitter on 10% usage, so he doesn't throw it a ton. And then up in the bigs, they upped his usage to 15%, and the whiff rate dropped to 44%. So it stayed basically as effective. And we saw a couple pretty nasty splits from him. I'm thinking of an outing against Oakland where I thought the splitter was really good. And
that's right. It was an afternoon start. Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
And so, I think with everything with Madden, you see it at times, and it just needs to be more consistent and located better. But that those last 4 starts at AAA and what he showed in the big leagues give you hope that could work out. And in either role, really, if it doesn't work out, if he doesn't throw enough strikes, then I think the splitter could be a really nice weapon for him out of the bullpen.
And one thing about Ty Madden too was the questions came up about whether he can hit against, or can he get left against lefties, and he was able to answer the bell with that this year. So
yeah, the split had a huge role in that. And then the odd thing was, then the righty started to hit him. But we wrote an article about it. Like, they lowered his arm slot, they moved him on the mound, and then everything seemed to click there at the end in Toledo. And we saw splashes in the big leagues too. So you hope that they figured it out. But again, development, not a linear path. Sometimes it goes up, sometimes it comes down. But I don't know. I think Madden's heading in the right direction finally. And number 5 is kind of one of the more underrated guys in the system, Jake Miller. And again, his changeup is not necessarily, it doesn't jump out visually. Like, if you're watching, you don't go, oh man, that's a nasty changeup. But it just performed really well for him. I think he's mostly a fastball slider guy, and his changeup, he threw it 15, 20% in low A and got a 50% whiff rate on it, 55%. But again, I think that's because guys were gearing up for his fastball and his changeup or his slider, and he would just kind of sneak it by him. And his whiff rate wasn't the same at higher levels, but he still showed flashes of it, and he uses it often enough for it to be a solid pitch for him. And at times, I think it's a traditional circle change in like, the 85, 87 mile an hour range, maybe 84, 86. But at times you'll see him throw what appears to, it almost looks like a split at like 88. And it looks pretty useful. I think his first strikeout in this clip, I don't know if we'll get to it because he had a kind of a tough first inning there in his Erie debut. But yeah, you get to see his first strikeout, I believe, comes on that split. And here's a nice throw for Patrick Lee, by the way.
That's why he's on our defense list. Look, I just gunned him down.
Yeah. So yeah, Jake Miller, like I said, it's not going to be a pitch that jumps off the screen at you, but I think it gives him a chance to continue to start, even though I would still believe that he's going to end up as a reliever, or he worked as a swingman mostly this year. But I think it's a good pitch for him, and I thought it was good enough to include him on the list. I don't know if I don't think we'll ever see it. It'll show up here, and I actually think it was against a lefty that he threw it, which is good to see. So, but you see, I don't know. It's never bad to talk about Jake Miller because he had a pretty good year, threw a lot of strikes. Maybe we'll talk about him some more on the command list because I think his first strikeout comes against this guy right here.
Here's where the reason why I think that changeup works well with Miller on that.
Not against this guy.
On that angle too, because the one thing about Miller, you're talking about throwing consistently on strikes, it's consistently in the same arm slot too, and that's why the changeup could be so effective as a pitch, because it comes so late. The way his extension comes out of his hand, it just comes out so late.
Mm-hmm. So I think it's right here.
Yeah.
Kind of just drops off the table there to 88. So in the same plane as the fastball. So yeah, I mean, again, he's a guy whose stuff I think works better just in conjunction. Like you don't pick out any one pitch and go, oh, that's nasty, but it plays well all the way up to AA. So we'll see how he fares in 2025, because he also put up dominant strikeout numbers in the Arizona Fall League. He struck out 8 and won 4 inning outing, but he also got hit around pretty good too. So, and then I could just throw in some honorable mentions. Ronnie Chalice, we saw. I remember we were watching clips of him, and you were like, "Oh my god, look at that changeup!" And it's true. Like he has got a nasty changeup. I don't think we ever put it. We maybe put a clip online or whatever, but he's not somebody who jumped out. Duke Abear, who famously used his changeup to strike out Juan Soto, Julio Rodriguez, and Rafael Devers in the World Baseball Classic, and the Tigers signed him like 15 minutes later. Now in pro ball, changeup didn't play as well because hitters knew about it, and it's like 84, and his fastball's like 88, so it's not ideal. But honorable mention for striking out those dudes for sure. Garrett Burhan has a pretty good changeup. I there's not a whole lot to say about it. It's not his best pitch, but it's his second best pitch, and I has a chance to be average. And then there's some other guys. Carlos Lequarica had like a high whiff rate on his changeup. Same with Cole Patton and Joe Miller. But all those three of those guys were doing it at low A. And we've talked endlessly before that you throw your changeup in low A, some hitters just can't hit it. That's just like the first. There's lots of lefties and righties who can throw a good changeup and locate it in the zone and low A, and hitters just have no chance. And some of those guys, like Joe Miller, jumped up to high A, and it did not work anymore. But still, it was like a 55% whiff rate in low A, so I put him in there. And the last one is PJ Poulin, who is a lefty, but he was up in AAA, and he had a pretty nice whiff rate up there. And you just give him some credit for that, for being at a higher level. And he strikes me as maybe next year's Sean Gunther. This kind of guy who's not on any prospect list. You don't really think about him, but he's a lefty and comes up and gets some outs at some point during the season. And finally, just the future projections. Got 4 guys here, and it's all kind of the same story. Rainer Castillo, Gabriel Reyes, Joseph Montalvo, and Danya Evans. All these guys, they don't throw their changeups terribly often. It's kind of like a Jake Miller situation where I think hitters are gearing up for the other 2 pitches, and they're not prepared for the changeups. And when they come, they swing and miss a lot. And I think we need to see all those guys throw them more often. Now, Evans is a pure reliever, I think, but Montalvo's changeup is really pretty good. He just didn't throw it a ton. And Reyes and Castillo both show signs of it. They just need to throw more. So,
yeah, once Castillo gets that changeup going, because that sinker already throws its heavy. If you can get that going, shoot, so it's gonna bode well for him. In addition to he was throwing a good fastball towards this part of the season. So as far as breaking balls go, it is no brainer. Number 1 on this list is Jackson Job slider, and Job, when he is on, well, I forgot about Myers. Makes a great catch in the playoffs. That's all that matters. But
nice.
but here's the thing about Jackson Job slider. It's one of the best in all of baseball. It's electric stuff. Team that up with the fastball. We were just talking about his changeup already a little bit, but the list itself is like there's some really good off breaking balls in the system, but Job's does stand out. The high spin rate, of course, and that's primarily one of the big reasons why the Tigers drafted him, is because of that ridiculous slider that's just gotten better.
Yeah, it's interesting because I don't know if it was classified as a sweeper at the big league level or not, because it's a little bit slower. It's like 82, 83, and it has tons of horizontal movement and spin. Trying to look, they call it a sweeper at the big league level. He didn't throw it a ton when he got to the majors, and maybe that was just
by design, wasn't it? Because
probably because it's kind of known as his signature pitch or whatever. And maybe if they had the scouting report, that's what people thought was coming. But I'll say this: like, I do think it doesn't play as well as its reputation, and part of it, I think, is that it just moves so much that hitters see it. They go, oh, I can't, like, and occasionally he'll throw it just right, and guys flail at it, but it doesn't seem like a pitch he's terribly comfortable kind of back-footing to lefties yet, which I think would be a big step, or kind of throwing it at the hip of right-handed hitters and letting it break over the heart of the plate. I think everything's there for it to become a big strikeout pitch for him. It's just I think he just needs to refine his command and his location of it. But yeah, like every other metric of it is absurd. I think the spin rate dropped a little bit once he got into that AAA Major League Baseball, because that their sort of seams are lower, but it's still going to be a plus spin pitch, and probably eventually will develop into a big strikeout pitch for him. I don't know if it will be starting 2025.
So I was going back and forth for number 2, and I decided to, because I mean we've had Jaden Ham has been on our list for everything. I mean, he was our minor league pitcher of the year, which it makes a lot of sense. But then I went back and I decided to. We've been talking about Garrett Burhan, and he comes in at number 2 for me because his slider this year was absurd. I think he has a really good slider, and the reason why I gave it to Burhan over Jaden Ham's who comes in at number 3 at curveball. It's just because the same thing as Job. His slider moves all over the place, and it just came a really good pitch for him, and he was able to go up to Double-A and handle his, and again, work. He led the team. He led the minor leagues in Tiger minor league system, and innings pitched, and he was up there in strikeouts too. He was a workhorse, and that slider is because of that slider. I mean, that's just is a really sick pitch for him, especially on right-handers. And I think that because, to me, also, really speaking of his year at West Michigan, which was last year was kind of pedestrian, I think he really took a step up this year because of his sliders got better.
Yeah, I agree. I think he was kind of stuck there in West Michigan for a little bit, and I think the slider just continues to get better. And you'll see him change the shape on it. You see that the ones we've seen, like that was a get me over. He's got a kind of a traditional slider in the 82 to 84 range, and then he'll throw a harder one that's like more cutterish, like 85, 86. And that he can do that, I think, is big. And it just really reminds me a lot. The whole profile reminds me a lot of Alex Faedo. Now, Faedo eventually had to move to the bullpen, and I think that'll happen for Burhan too. But I think the slider will play in the bullpen, and maybe even play even better if he's throwing harder in shorter stints. But yeah, I agree. I think it's an above average pitch for him. It's his best pitch, and I don't know. I feel like nobody in the system talks about Garrett Burhan but us. We're the Burhan boosters, I suppose. And the Tigers did not protect him in the 40-man or on their 40-man in the Rule 5 draft, and nobody took him. So maybe there's parts of his profile that people don't like, that we're not seeing. I think maybe the fastballs are just too hittable. But I don't know. Throw your best pitch more often, and I think you can get out to the big league level with that slider. So we'll see what happens.
I think just because the adjustment he made at Double-A was so good. I mean, he came up and was actually a big part of that rotation down the stretch. Especially Erie wasn't as pitch heavy, or didn't have as much pitching depth per se than they did the year before. And I thought he did a really good job, and to be able to go to Double-A with that slider and able to get strikeouts the way he did, I think that says something, and the numbers indicate that to me. And so, I mean, again, not to say that Jaden Ham or 3 with his curveball, there's nothing to sneeze at either. It's nothing that but I wanted to give Burhan the benefit of the doubt because he did it at a level. He did it at a higher level. And I think to me that says something about the player itself. I mean, this is a guy who has gone significantly under the radar. And so I don't know, like I wanted to give him a little bit of a benefit of the doubt with that. And to me, it's just like, it says something to the Tigers and his organization, and that the depth, like we were talking about this earlier in our, our number, you can check out the list. We just dropped do the Tigers deserve number 1 ranking list. And we talked about how rankings and all that qualify. Burhan does not come up on any lists at all, but the stuff plays up.
Yeah, no, I think he deserves a little bit more attention for sure.
All right, so we just kind of already talked about number 3 in Jaden Ham's curveball, and Jaden Ham. The reason why that curveball plays up so well is that fastball movement. His fastball is one of the best in the system, even with like the low miles per hour kind of thing. It's not all about velocity, we've talked about ad nauseum, but it's the curveball that he can ride on the top of the zone really well. It also kind of plays where he can play at the top of the strike zone, but also it's got that hammer effect where he can go down to the lower part of the zone and get those swings and misses. And this is a start where we're at quite a bit of his starts this year at West Michigan, but here's an example of that, like just the ability to just go to the top bottom of the zone.
Yeah, it really, the curveball really plays well with the fastball, like you said. It's if that fastball, if he's throwing it at the top of the zone, and basically the curveball, they're both coming out, behind his ear and above his head, and it's just really hard for the hitters to differentiate the fastball and the breaking ball. It's kind of a classic, early Astros dynasty riding four seamer downer curve, and yeah, it's a good swing and miss pitch for him. It's good for him to steal strikes early in the count, and I think it's going to remain a good pitch for him. Hitters at higher levels will probably have more success, so that becomes inherent or important for him to continue working on the slider and the changeup. But we saw flashes of both of those this year, and I think the curveball will probably remain his signature pitch, even if his usage of it kind of lessens.
Yeah, because it's a good pitch, especially also it does induce weak contact because of his delivery. Because when you come over the top like that curve, when you get riding down, you make that adjustment at the end of the bat. It's going to cause some weak contact too. So that also plays up for not only as a good strikeout pitch, but also a pitch for good contact. Number 4. So this was another one back and forth because based off what I was able to see, sort of Gibson Long, I mean, his slider is really good too. But I'm going to put him more on the honorable mention list because I wanted to give some really Andrew Sears this year. I think has his slider deserves a lot of credit as well, and he comes in at number 4. And should stop playing Ham there, but the video on Andrew Sears is very limited. But from what I went back and forth between him and Gabriel Reyes, but I don't know. They're both really good. I mean, but I'm gonna give it slightly to Andrew Sears.
Yeah, Sears is a really interesting one. We, like you said, we didn't show a ton of him during the course of the year because, he would have these outings, particularly at the beginning of the year, where he just struggled to throw strikes, and I think his overall walk rate remained fairly high throughout the course of the year. But he's a big lefty with decent velocity and a really kind of a low 3/4 arm slot, and yeah, I think his slider really is probably going to be his best pitch going forward. And I'm trying to look to see what kind of strikeout rate he ran on it.
Oh, he ran on the slider itself. Oh yeah.
Let me see. I'm looking right now, or the whiff rate, I should say. 51.2% whiff rate on the. Oh, sorry, that was overall. Let me do it by player and pitch type. Now we're going to see it. Yeah, it's he's a tough look, particularly for low A hitters, and I'm glad that you had him on the list because it is a guy we haven't talked about. So yeah, 51.2% rate, whiff rate on his slider. Batters hit 200 against it with very little power, 2,400 RPM, so kind of average-ish spin rate. But given that arm angle and just the general look of it, it's a good breaking ball for sure.
And number 5, and last on our list, and this is where I had a tough decision to make. This is where the Tigers have a really lot of guys that could qualify for number 4, number 5. There's honorable mentions all day with this list, but Gabriel Reyes comes in because, I mean, he really, to me, stood out above. If it wasn't for the fact that the damn rain delay screwed over Florida State League, I think he would have got a little more attention in the playoffs. But you talk about arm angles, similar to Sears. He's a lefty. He's a little shorter, kind of stout a little bit, but he throws the ball particularly well on the top of the zone, but use that slider really well on the backside of the right foot and get some good strikeouts with that pitch.
Yeah, and the results on his slider last year were outstanding. And what's interesting is he throws it pretty hard compared to his fastball's like 91, 93. He'll touch 94, but the slider's like 84, 86, which is pretty hard. And you could see, and he's another guy who seems to be able to kind of alter the shape at will. He'll backdoor it. He'll bust guys inside. He'll kind of get a little more vertical on it. But, let me look at the numbers. Right, last year, a 46.8% whiff rate on his slider, and he threw it almost 40% of the time. So batters knew it was coming. They couldn't do anything about it. They hit 0.99 against it with a 141 slugging. And it's just low A, but still, I mean, it's a nasty pitch for him. And like you said, he was just dominating down the stretch. And unfortunately, he only threw I think he only got 1 inning or less than 1 inning in that final game, and it was raining at the time, and the results weren't great. And it was just not an ideal situation. But in the first round of the Florida State League playoffs, he was absolutely dominant, and I think he struck out 10 or 11 batters in that outing, and a lot of it is that slider. And yeah, really fun profile. Again, a guy that you don't hear talked about much outside of us, but I think he's going to make some noise this year.
Yeah, I mean, Jake Miller was. I mean, I was going to go with Jake Miller at number 5, but I mean, the reason why Miller made the list. Offspeed. Miller has been everywhere, and look, Miller's slider is just as good, if not better. I mean, he did get up 3 levels this year to AA, but the reason why I like Reyes is just because a slight advantage of it seems like he gets a little more swing and miss with that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And the ability, as you mentioned, Chris, the ability to change shapes with it too, similar to what Miller can do as well. I don't know. It to me, it's like, tomato, I guess, if you want to be particular about it. But either way, it is nice to have the other mentions on this list too were I wanted to we debated about this. We had a joke about this. Brant Herter with his sweeper, but technically he's now major league eligible.
Yeah, and we need to figure out how we want to do that, because I've mentioned Dingler on a couple lists, and I mentioned Herter. By major league standards, Dylan Dingler and Brant Herter are no longer considered rookies because they had more than 45 days on the active roster. By Baseball America standards and other ranking sites, they did not exceed the innings limit or at bat limit to become to no longer be rookies. It's our site. We can do whatever the hell we want. So I'm fine with it. I'm fine with Herter on there. Yeah, but he's definitely, I would mention him. Yosber Sanchez, his slider got a ton of whiffs in low A. I don't think it got quite as many in high A, but it was still a pretty nasty pitch for him. I don't know who else made your honorable mentions.
Wilmer Flores. I mean, we can't forget about Flores. Yeah. Even last year with the injuries aside, his slider is still pretty good. And again, we've talked about him needing to develop a third pitch, but still Flores will come up there on the list as well. And who's that? Milton's curve.
Troy Melton.
Yeah, Troy Melton's curve. Again, that was, to me, I think the one thing about him this year at AA, Troy Melton struggled with consistency, but when that curve was on, I mean, that was his really go-to pitch to get strikeouts.
Yeah, and he's another guy he's got like 3 different. He's got kind of like a cutter, a slider, and a curve, and they're all, depending on the day, one of them works better than the other one. But yeah, that's probably going to be his main strikeout pitch going forward. I think his fastball's still pretty good. But yeah, there are a bunch of guys in the system. I think Rainer Castillo's slider is pretty damn good, especially working in conjunction with that sinker. Who else?
Future projection wise with Owen Hall, we talked about a little bit. That has potential for that. Michael Massey too. That was another guy who was also got future potential based off his slider development too, especially at Wake Forest when we had a chance to talk to him about that. He was talking about the slider development he was going through when he got there.
Yeah, when he was in the bullpen for Wake Forest, he was just an absolutely nasty, almost unhittable, kind of Jaden Ham-esque high fastball, hard breaking ball that nobody could touch. That's a good one. You mentioned Owen Hall, their second rounder. I also really like Ethan Scheffelbein's slider curveball combination, the lefty they took also in the second round. And then Zach Swanson, their 9th rounder, really can spin the ball. He's got a slider that's like 2,800 RPMs. And I don't know if there's a clip. I know I put it in our like personal chat, but of a strikeout he got, or swing and miss he got at the Perfect Game National, where it was like, oh man, that is a nasty slider. I think it kind of backed up for him over the course of his high school senior season, but it's in there, and so he's another guy to keep an eye out for. So yeah, a lot of fun younger, A ball and lower breaking balls in the system. And then the one other guy we talked about, he's not necessarily a prospect just because the rest of his arsenal isn't great, but Colin Fields has a pretty nice curveball that got him a lot of strikeouts at high A, but I don't think it's going to play at higher levels. Just like I said, the rest of the arsenal is not really there.
Yeah, Cam Brown too, out of Central Michigan. It's got a decent sweeper too as well that it could play up depending on that. But overall, no, even the Tigers will be interesting this year, Chris. And this is something that we'll talk a little bit more in heading into 2025. Is that double A this year. Erie is going to be more interesting from a sense of a pitching standpoint because you're going to see a couple guys repeat there.
Mhm.
But whoever the young guys are going to bring in, I'm intrigued to see going to be that adjustment from West Michigan to Erie because as you recall, there wasn't a lot of arms that came up from Double A, unlike the years, from West Michigan to Double A this year. Outside of, Garrett Burhan, and there's a few others, but it was very, very little movement between West Michigan and Erie standpoint of like pitching wise.
Yeah, Miller got there at the very end of the year, and I guess Carlos Pena came up earlier in the year. But really, that Wilkel Hernandez, who they re-signed as a minor league free agent, made every start in Double A, and Burhan pitched a ton, and Pena pitched a ton, and Job was there for part of the year when he was getting hurt, and Melton pitched a lot. So there really wasn't a ton of movement. There weren't a lot of guys that, oddly enough, toward the end of the year, it felt like they didn't have enough starting pitching, but for most of the year, there wasn't room for guys to come up. So it will be interesting to see who comes up this year. I don't know if Montalvo will get pushed. I think he'll probably head back to West Michigan. I would think Jake Miller starts in Double A. Melton is probably back. Wilkel will probably be back. Carlos Pena will probably be back. So it might not, at least at the beginning of the year, it might not look a whole lot different either.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah, I think I could see Pena there for another start of the year before he goes up to AAA. I really think that some of the pitchers they've been signing the last couple of weeks have been pretty much, I like to think just more Toledo depth versus Erie depth, and then pushing that down a little bit because it could be a chance that Flores could start the year in Erie. Possibility. I know it might sound like a demotion for him, but he could start based off some of the minor league free agents they've signed. Is theoretically possible. They signed a guy from the Dodgers too just recently. Pitched around with the Astros, a lefty. So we'll see what happens there. But
yeah, and we don't really know what the plan is for Flores. We thought that he was going to move to the bullpen permanently. Who knows? Maybe they try him as a starter again, and Double A would probably be the level to do that because that's kind of the last level that he was pitching at as a starter. But it'll be. We'll certainly dig into that more as the offseason plays out. We like to kind of project the rotations, and we'll probably do another roster projection too. But Carlos Marcano could theoretically move up to Double A.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think. I'm looking at other pitchers who there weren't a lot of guys who met the innings limit last year. Marcano was one of them. I'm looking at Colin Fields theoretically. Yeah. I don't know. Well, in Ham, we'd like to think that Ham would be in Double A, but who knows? We'll see. They didn't push him this year, so I can't believe I forgot about Ham. But
there's so many different ways they can go about this, and so I think they'll probably sign another minor league free agent guy out there that will be a filler that can go between AAA and AAA and Double A. So
yeah, Austin Bergner pitched a lot of innings for Erie last year. Sometimes you just need bodies out there, and he was a very reliable Double A starter, so that we could see a repeat of that too.
Yeah. So at any rate, thank you so much for checking out our tool series. Next up will be our command, as we'll finish the year with command. But check out all our podcasts and stuff. Check out all our lists over at Tigers. Please like and subscribe to our channel. And if we're on Blue Sky now. If you're doing that, still on Twitter, there's a Patreon. And like I said, also if you like us on Facebook, Tigers Minor League Report, and check out all our great content. And one last thing. So at the end of the year, looks like towards the end of the year, we'll be doing a state of the Tiger Minor League Report for 2025. So we have a couple of things in the works that are just about ready to be announced. So for myself and Chris, stay classy, everybody, and we'll talk to you soon.
Happy holidays.
Happy holidays.